Hello and welcome to Stories in Life. Here we share real and emotional stories that touch the heart, make you think, and sometimes even change the way you see the world. If you love deep, meaningful life experiences, subscribe now and join our community. Your support helps us bring you even more powerful stories that inspire, move, and stay with you long after the video ends. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story together. Soon after their wedding, Victoria decided to surprise her husband with a romantic gesture, hiding in the closet with champagne and lace lingerie. But when he locked the door and took out his phone, the whisper of his words froze the blood in her veins. Hello, friends. Before we continue, please write which country you're watching this video from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new exciting stories. The first snow always reminded Victoria of new beginnings. White flakes dancing in the air seemed to erase everything old, covering the world with a fragile blanket of possibilities. Such was that December evening when fate, if it could be called fate, brought her together with Daniel. The coffee shop, tucked away in one of Chicago's old side streets, served as Victoria's refuge after exhausting days at the publishing house. That evening she sat by the window, watching snowflakes melt on the glass, and leafed through yet another author's manuscript, when the door burst open, letting in a tall stranger along with the frosty air. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The voice, deep and confident, made her look up. The man stood before her in a dark coat dusted with snow, eyes the color of dark chocolate, a smile that seemed to make the room warmer. "Yes, of course," she answered, feeling an unfamiliar excitement. This was how their romance began, swift as a mountain stream, sweeping away all barriers and warnings in its path. If someone had told her then that in 3 months she would be wearing this man's last name, Victoria would have just laughed. After a painful breakup with Alex that lasted 5 years, she had sworn to herself to be more careful. But Daniel seemed woven from delicate lace of contradictions that somehow formed a perfect pattern. A successful financier, he understood art better than she did herself. Strong and decisive in business, with her he was gentle as a spring breeze. After each date, he would send not bouquets of roses, too banal for him, but a single orchid, a rare variety, with a note quoting her favorite poets. "You're rushing too fast, Vic." Marina shook her head when Victoria, breathless with delight, told her about new facets of her chosen one. "Remember what happened last time." But her friend's words drowned in the tide of new feeling. Memories of how Alex methodically destroyed her self-esteem year after year, word by word, how he made her doubt herself until she began to believe she deserved nothing better. All of this seemed distant and unreal next to Daniel. "He's different, Marina. He respects me, my work, my dreams," Victoria said, and she believed it with all her soul. Then came the proposal in a small Italian restaurant where Daniel had brought her supposedly for a business dinner with partners. There were no partners, but there was a string quartet and a ring with a sapphire like a piece of night sky. "I know we haven't known each other that long," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "But sometimes life gives us only one chance to catch happiness. I don't want to miss it. Will you be my wife, Victoria?" And she said yes, feeling warmth spread inside, filling the voids that had remained cold for years. Their wedding was like a fairy tale, a small ceremony for closest family at a country house covered in ivy. The white dress Victoria chose with trembling, as if in childhood flipping through bridal magazines. Daniel's gaze when she walked toward him down the short path strewn with rose petals. Marina's toast, the only guarded moment of the day. "To your love. May it be real." After the ceremony, they immediately moved into the house Daniel had bought for them. Spacious in a quiet neighborhood, with large windows and a garden. Victoria remembered how she first crossed the threshold, holding her husband's hand, and thought, "This is it, my place in the world. This is where I'll be happy." The first weeks of married life were filled with that special tenderness that only newlyweds have. Morning coffee in bed, notes left on the bathroom mirror, long conversations until dawn, and quiet confessions that took her breath away. "I never thought it was possible to love like this," Daniel would whisper, holding her in the darkness. "You're my miracle, my Vic." And she believed. Believed every word, every look, every touch. Love enveloped her like a cocoon, protecting her from all doubts and fears. But sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night, Victoria caught herself with a strange feeling. Something elusive, like a shadow, slid along the edge of consciousness. She would look at her sleeping husband, so handsome, with slightly furrowed brows in sleep, and feel a prick of anxiety. Too perfect, too fast, too much. As if she were trying to drink from a fountain, but the water overflowed the edges, not allowing her to quench her thirst. In such moments, Victoria would chase away uninvited thoughts and press closer to Daniel, inhaling his scent, a light aroma of expensive cologne mixed with something indefinably his own. "I'm happy," she would repeat to herself. "I'm finally truly happy." And somewhere deep inside, in that secret corner of the soul where we hide the most terrible premonitions, doubt stirred, fragile as first ice, and just as dangerous. Changes crept in stealthily, like the first wrinkles under the eyes. Imperceptible until one morning you look in the mirror at a certain angle. Victoria couldn't name the exact day when she felt a chill between her shoulder blades, watching Daniel's departing back. Perhaps it all began with those calls. February turned out cold. Outside their house windows, wind tormented bare tree branches, and inside by the fireplace it should have been warm and cozy. But Victoria increasingly found herself hugging her shoulders, sitting alone on the sofa, getting used to the emptiness of a house where their shared happiness was supposed to live. "Sorry, honey, the meeting ran long," Daniel would say, returning after midnight. He smelled of winter, expensive brandy, and something elusive that hadn't been there before. She would nod silently, accepting explanations, forcing herself not to notice lipstick traces on his collar. Too obvious a detail for such a smart man as Daniel. "That's from colleague Alla Petrovna," he would say with a slight smirk if she asked. "You know these women over 50 with their habit of kissing when they meet. Or maybe it all started with the phone, which now always lay screen down. Daniel used to be able to leave it anywhere. Now the device seemed to have grown into his palm. "Who are you talking to so late?" she asked once, waking at 3 in the morning to the quiet voice of her husband coming from his study. "Sorry I woke you." He stood in the bedroom doorway, a silhouette against the dim light from the corridor. "They called from Singapore. Time difference, you understand." She nodded and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her heart beat somewhere in her throat, and before her inner vision flashed fragments of an overheard phrase. "She suspects nothing. Need a little more time." In the morning these words seemed like a figment of her imagination, a nightmare that melted in the light of day. Especially when Daniel, so caring, brought her coffee in bed and kissed her long before leaving for work. "Love you, my girl," he said goodbye, and she again believed that everything was fine. But a week later she found the documents. Victoria wasn't specifically looking for them, just cleaning out a desk drawer searching for a spare flash drive when she stumbled upon a folder with papers. A purchase agreement for their house, which they had chosen together, which they dreamed of as a family nest. Her gaze stopped on the owner line. Only Daniel's name, though he had sworn they would register the house in both their names. With trembling fingers she flipped through the pages. Financial documents, account statements, some powers of attorney. Her name appeared nowhere. "What are you doing?" Daniel's voice caught her off guard. He stood in the study doorway, and there was no trace of his usual warm smile. "I was looking for a flash drive," she answered, feeling somehow guilty. "Daniel, why is the house registered only in your name?" For seconds his face transformed. The severity disappeared, replaced by an understanding smile. "Oh, that." He waved his hand dismissively, approaching closer. "Pure formality, darling. It was easier with the mortgage. Didn't want to bother you with these boring details." He hugged her, kissed her temple, took the folder and closed the drawer. "Let's go somewhere tonight, to that Italian restaurant you liked so much." She agreed, but the inner voice, the same one she had learned to ignore in her relationship with Alex, now screamed so loudly it drowned out all other thoughts. At dinner Daniel was charming, as in the first days of their acquaintance. He told funny stories, made her laugh, looked at her as if she were the most beautiful thing that had happened in his life. And Victoria almost forced herself to believe that her doubts were just paranoia. "How are things at the publishing house?" he asked when they brought dessert. "Still working on that book about investigative journalism?" She nodded, feeling strange relief that he remembered details of her work. "Yes, the author heavily revised the last chapters. Now the story has become much more convincing." "What's it about, remind me?" He covered her hand with his, stroking her wrist with his thumb. "About a woman who exposes a financial scam," Victoria answered, not noticing how his shoulders tensed for a second. "Very detective-like story. Sounds fascinating." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "But you know that in real life everything is much more complicated. Sometimes what seems like deception actually has valid reasons." She didn't answer, and they rode home in silence. At the house, Daniel suddenly said, "By the way, I wanted to discuss something with you. I've been offered a new project, very promising, but it will require some investment. I'm thinking of mortgaging the house." "Mortgage our house?" she asked, feeling everything inside turn cold. "But we just moved in." "It's temporary, sweetheart." He stroked her cheek. "Pure formality to get a loan. In a year or two we'll be living at a completely different level, I promise." Victoria looked at her husband and saw a stranger before her. Where was that Daniel who told her about his dreams of building family happiness in this house? Who said money was just a means, not a goal? That night, lying next to him, she listened to his breathing and tried to sort out her feelings. On one hand, there was a rational explanation for everything: work delays, ambitious project, secrecy, fatigue, documents, bureaucratic formalities. On the other hand, deep inside she knew. She knew as clearly as you know the sun hides behind storm clouds even when you can't see it. Something was wrong. Daniel was changing, or maybe taking off a mask he had worn from the very beginning of their acquaintance. "I'm exaggerating," she convinced herself, remembering all the moments of tenderness between them. "This is just fear of being happy after what I went through with Alex." But intuition, a faithful dog that never lies to its master, continued to growl dully somewhere deep in her soul, warning of danger she couldn't yet see. The anniversary of their meeting fell on Wednesday. A date unmarked on calendars, kept only in Victoria's heart like a small island of hope amid an ocean of growing doubts. She wanted to believe this night could return what was slowly slipping through her fingers: their closeness, trust, the light in Daniel's eyes when he looked at her. The luxury lingerie store on Fifth Avenue greeted her with soft light and the rustle of expensive fabrics. The saleswoman, a well-built woman with an appraising gaze, helped choose a set in indigo with lace that Daniel once went crazy for. "For a special occasion?" she asked, wrapping the purchase in rustling paper. "Yes," Victoria answered, and in that short word sounded such longing for the past that the woman paused for a second. At home, Victoria prepared everything like in those romantic movies they used to watch together, curled up on the couch. Roses in the bedroom, candles, a bottle of champagne in a silver bucket with ice. She was taking a bath when a message came from Daniel. "Running late, important meeting. Will be after 9. Something clenched inside, but she pushed away the bitterness. All the better, thought Victoria. More time to prepare. By 8 o'clock everything was ready. A porcelain dish with Daniel's favorite truffles on the bedside table. Silk sheets smelling of lavender. Soft music. The same they once danced to on the roof of his old apartment when the whole world seemed to belong only to them. Wine drunk in waiting gave her courage. Victoria put on the new lingerie, threw on Daniel's favorite satin robe over it. The clock hands approached 11, and suddenly an idea struck her. What if she arranged a real surprise? Slipping to the closet, she opened the door and climbed inside among her husband's suits and shirts smelling of familiar cologne. "I'll jump out and scare him," she thought with that childlike joy that sometimes comes in moments of especially acute loneliness. Victoria didn't know how long she sat in the darkness of the closet, listening to the ticking of wall clocks and her own heartbeat. When the front door slammed downstairs, she flinched. Footsteps on the stairs heavier than usual, as if Daniel were carrying something. The bedroom door opened. "What the hell?" Her husband's voice sounded irritated at the sight of the romantic setting. Victoria was already about to jump out, but something in his tone made her freeze. Daniel walked through the room, blew out several candles, knocking one over. Wax spilled on the expensive carpet. Then he returned to the door, and a sound that had never been there before. He turned the key in the lock. Victoria's heart began pounding so loudly she thought he must hear it. Through the crack between the closet doors she could see her husband take out his phone and dial a number. His face, usually soft in home settings, now looked hard with sharp lines around his mouth, cold eyes, the face of a stranger. "It's me," he said quietly. "Yes, alone. My little fool apparently decided to arrange a romantic evening. Good thing she didn't wait up." Victoria stopped breathing. "The plan is moving on schedule. The notary prepared all documents. Only her signature remains, but there won't be problems with that. This lovesick idiot will sign without looking if I ask." Every word stabbed into her like a knife blade, twisting, tearing apart everything she had believed in. And Daniel continued. "Transfer will take 2 weeks, then we sell immediately. The buyer is already there. Everything as you predicted." A pause and a chuckle that turned Victoria's blood to ice. "No, she suspects nothing. Thinks I'm her knight in shining armor." He took a truffle from the bedside table, bit into it and grimaced. "Getting sick of this role already." "Yes, then I'll disappear as we agreed. No traces whatsoever. She'll be left with nothing. Can't go back to her family. They were against the marriage. Pride won't let her admit she was so fooled." Victoria pressed her palms to her mouth to keep from screaming. The pain was physical, as if something inside had shattered and shards had pierced her very core. Daniel, her Daniel, the person she trusted more than anyone in the world, the person she loved. It was all a lie. "Stupid lovesick fools are always the easiest targets," he continued, pacing around the room. "Especially ones like her, after toxic relationships with low self-esteem. They so want to believe in a fairy tale that they don't see the obvious." Hot tears streamed down Victoria's cheeks, but she didn't dare even wipe them away. Every muscle in her body tensed in absolute stillness. One thought hammered in her head. Don't reveal yourself, don't give yourself away. The conversation ended. Daniel loosened his tie, threw some papers he'd brought with him on the bed, and left the room. The lock clicked. Only when his footsteps died away downstairs did Victoria allow herself to breathe. The air burned her lungs. Climbing out of the closet on shaking legs, she looked around the room. The same candles, the same champagne, the same flowers. Everything as it was. But the world had changed irreversibly. On the bed lay documents. Something about power of attorney for property sale with an empty line for her signature. She touched the paper with her fingertips, as if she could feel the betrayal emanating from it. Victoria sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her breathing became ragged. Everything swam before her eyes. The picture of happiness with Daniel, which she had so carefully kept in her heart, crumbled, exposing ugly reality. At that moment she remembered her grandmother's words. "When a mirror breaks, you can't glue it back without cracks, but you can create a mosaic from the pieces." Victoria raised her head. The reflection in the mirror opposite, a pale face with reddened eyes, lips swollen from tears, was the face of a woman whose world had just collapsed. But in this woman's eyes, through pain and despair, something new was emerging. "Not going to happen," she thought, looking into her reflection's eyes. "I won't be your stupid lovesick fool. Not anymore." The morning after betrayal has its own special taste, bitter as oxidized copper, astringent as unripe persimmon. Victoria didn't remember how she survived the night. Whether she sat on the bedroom floor until dawn or fell into heavy sleep full of images that made her want to scream. Everything was erased, leaving behind only pulsing emptiness. When Daniel, as if nothing had happened, kissed her goodbye before leaving for work, she didn't pull away. Her body, accustomed to this ritual, responded mechanically. Slight tilt of the head, light smile. But inside everything turned over, as if a snake had coiled under her heart, ready to strike at the offender. "You look a bit pale today," he noticed, already standing in the doorway. "Everything all right? Just didn't sleep well," she lied with an ease that scared her. "Work. Urgent project." His gaze, attentive, appraising, lingered on her face for a moment. Victoria felt cold sweat break out on her back. Did he know? Did he notice she'd heard everything? But Daniel only nodded. "Don't overwork yourself," he said, and his voice carried familiar concern. That's what he was. A brilliant actor who made her believe in love that never existed. When the door closed behind him, Victoria collapsed on the couch, pressing her palms to her eyes. Panic came in waves, squeezing her chest, making it hard to breathe. The woman she had seen before only in disaster reports, with empty gaze, detached from what was happening, now looked at her from the mirror. "I can't," pounded in her temples. With trembling fingers she found Marina's number in her phone. "Can you come over?" That's all she could say when her friend answered. "What happened? Where are you?" Marina's voice immediately became collected and clear. "At home, please come. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Marina arrived in 15, disheveled with a bag over her shoulder, as if she'd been ready for any turn of events. One look at Victoria was enough for her to understand everything. Him. Not a question. A statement. Victoria nodded, and the tears she had held back from that very minute when she heard Daniel's words poured out in a stream. She sobbed as she hadn't sobbed even in childhood when she broke her arm falling from swings. Deeply, agonizingly, as if her very core was splitting apart. Marina held her, stroked her hair like a child, and in this silent support there was more compassion than in 1,000 words. Only when the sobs subsided, turning to quiet whimpering, did she ask what he had done. And Victoria told everything. About the candles and romantic evening, about the closet, about the phone conversation, about the stupid lovesick fool. Her voice either broke to a whisper or became lifelessly even, like a person reading news reports about a disaster in a distant country. "Son of a bitch," Marina said only when she finished. "I knew something wasn't right with him, but this..." "You knew?" Victoria raised her head. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marina looked away, fingering the leather bracelet on her wrist, a habit betraying her agitation. "I tried, Vic. Remember I said he was too perfect, everything too fast." She sighed. "But you were so happy, and after Alex you deserved that happiness. You understand, I thought maybe I was wrong, maybe he really was your one and only." Victoria looked at her friend, and somewhere deep down, beneath layers of pain and betrayal, gratitude stirred. Marina had tried to protect not only her feelings but the very possibility of happiness. "And then I started noticing details," Marina continued. "How he avoided certain conversations, how he checked your reaction before saying something. But mainly, how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching." "How?" Victoria asked quietly. Appraisingly. Like at a thing he owned. Marina squeezed her hand. "I almost went crazy at your wedding but decided if I told you and was wrong, I'd destroy your relationship. And if I was right you wouldn't have believed me. Not then." Victoria nodded. Recognizing the bitter truth. She wouldn't have believed. Love has a strange property of turning warnings into noise, easily ignored against the sweet melody of romance. "What do I do now?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't go back to my parents. They were against it. God, they'll say we warned you until the end of my days." "You're not going anywhere," Marina said firmly. "He should lose everything, not you." "But how? He's smarter, more cunning. He has a plan, connections." "He has a weakness," Marina interrupted. "He thinks you're stupid and weak. That will be his downfall." Something changed in the room's atmosphere, as if a window had opened, letting in fresh wind. Victoria straightened, squared her shoulders. "You're right," she said, and her voice, trembling a minute ago, became firmer. "We need to act. But how? Marina reached for her bag. First, we need to find out who this Daniel really is. Who his accomplice is. What plan they're hatching. Gather evidence. And then, a dangerous glint flashed in Marina's eyes. We'll make him pay. For every lying, I love you. For every kiss. For every minute when he thought you were just a pawn in his game. A laptop, notebook, and voice recorder appeared on the kitchen table. Marina worked as a journalist in crime reporting. And now Victoria saw her for the first time in her professional element. Collected, methodical, with a clear plan of action. Main rule, she said, sketching a diagram in the notebook. He must not suspect anything. You continue playing the role of loving wife. All suspicions, all questions. Only to me. With him, complete trust and adoration. Victoria imagined kissing this person, knowing he was planning to destroy her. Her stomach clenched. I can't, she whispered. I can't pretend nothing has changed. Marina took her by the shoulders, looked into her eyes. You can because there's more strength in you than you think. Because you took the first step. You didn't break, didn't run, but decided to fight. And because, here she allowed herself a weak smile, you edit detective stories. Time to write your own. And at that moment Victoria felt something inside strengthen, form from the chaos of pain and betrayal into determination. Not the desperate determination of a person cornered, but the calm confidence of a woman who had found within herself strength for a long, difficult path. Where do we start? She asked. And in her voice sounded a new note, the note of a person ready not just to survive, but to win. Victoria had never considered herself an actress. School plays where she usually stood somewhere in the back of the stage, holding paper flowers, gave no reason to think otherwise. But now, every morning, waking up in bed next to the man who planned to destroy her, she put on a mask, pasted on a smile, and remembered Marina's instruction. The fewer changes the better, her friend had said. Do everything as before. Smile the same way. Say the same words. If you're too perfect a wife, he'll suspect something's wrong. And Victoria played. She brewed coffee for Daniel, but slightly stronger than he liked, as she used to do from inexperience. She kissed him goodbye, but not too long. She learned his daily schedule, habits she hadn't noticed before. For example, how he always checked his jacket pockets before hanging it in the closet. Or how, thinking she wasn't watching, he'd check her messages when she left the room. The house that so recently seemed like a fortress now turned into a minefield, and her body became an instrument. Every smile, every kiss, every embrace carefully measured, weighed, calibrated. Victoria's grandmother, who had survived the war as a nurse, used to tell her in childhood how she carried wounded from under fire. Fear is always there, granddaughter, but you need to make it work for you, not against you. Now she understood those words. Fear was her fuel, nourishing vigilance, making her notice details. A week after the night in the closet, Victoria learned the first important thing. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Daniel left the office not at 6 p.m. as he told her, but at 5 p.m., and headed not home but in an unknown direction. She learned this by accident. His secretary Natalie called to coordinate time for dinner with imaginary partners. Daniel has already left, the woman said. As usual, he has his Tuesday meeting. Right, completely forgot, Victoria chirped, hating herself for this falseness. At home she drew a calendar in her notebook, marked Tuesday and Thursday in red. Plan began to form. The following Tuesday, citing urgent work, she followed Daniel from the office by taxi, keeping a safe distance. Her heart pounded so hard it seemed the driver should hear it. But the man was absorbed in his own thoughts, only occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Stop here, she said when Daniel's black BMW turned toward a quiet side street in an area of old warehouses. She watched her husband park at an unremarkable building with a sign Apex Legal Services. Then, pulling up her coat hood, she walked past, trying not to attract attention. Through the murky shop window she saw Daniel go inside, shake hands with a short, stocky man, say something with a wide smile. Victoria sat in a cafe across the street for 2 hours, watching the office door, cursing herself for being unprepared. She should have brought a book or laptop so as not to look suspicious. When Daniel came out, she noticed he was carrying a folder that hadn't been with him before. In the evening when he returned home, she met him as usual, with a smile, questions about work, dinner on the stove. "Hard day?" she asked, watching him hide his briefcase in the study. "As always," he replied, approaching closer, kissing her neck. "And what did you do?" "Worked on a new manuscript." Half-truth, the best form of lie. She had indeed opened the file with text, though couldn't concentrate on a single line. Thursday everything repeated, the same office, the same person. But this time Daniel didn't come out alone, but with another man, tall, with military bearing, casually dressed but in expensive shoes. They got in Daniel's car and drove away. The third visit brought results. Victoria, sitting on a bench in the small park across the street, could make out the business cards lying on the administrator's counter. Apex Legal Firm Real Estate Operations, Registration and Liquidation of Legal Entities. Her heart sank. Among the services, printed in small type at the bottom of the card, was listed preparation of powers of attorney and notarial services. Now part of the plan became clearer. Here documents were prepared for manipulations with her property. That evening, leafing through a glossy magazine on the couch while Daniel worked in his study, she casually asked, "Honey, I heard that for real estate transactions, personal presence of both spouses is required. Is that true?" A pause, barely noticeable, but she felt it. "Usually yes," he answered finally, not looking up from his laptop. "But why do you ask?" "Oh, just a friend with her husband is selling an apartment. Complained about having to run around to agencies." The relief in his voice was almost palpable. "Yes, bureaucracy, but there are ways to simplify." "I know these ways," thought Victoria, remembering the power of attorney he was preparing for her signature. But the real breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Daniel took a shower and left his phone on the bedside table. Victoria hesitated only for a second, quickly turned on screen recording on her phone, unlocked his code 1805, their wedding day. What irony! And began viewing messages. What she was looking for was found in WhatsApp, marked simply with the letter A. Presumably arrest. "Documents ready. Meeting Thursday at usual place. Don't keep money on you, transfer after." And his reply. "Understood. The fool suspects nothing. Everything going according to plan." Her fingers trembled as she closed the app, returning the phone to its place. The sound of running water stopped, and Victoria barely had time to move away to the mirror, pretending to fix her hair, when Daniel came out of the bathroom. That night, lying next to him, listening to his measured breathing, she stared into the darkness with wide-open eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. How could she have been so blind? Miss all the signs, all the warnings. Now looking back she saw they were everywhere. In how Daniel avoided meeting her parents, in his vague answers about past relationships, in the absence of old friends at their wedding. Only business partners, only surface connections. "I wanted to believe," thought Victoria, her throat constricting with unshed tears. Her mother was 13 when grandmother was brought to the maternity ward from the camp, exhausted but unbroken. "There's always a choice, Vicky," grandmother used to say. "It's not what others do to you, but how you respond to it that defines your life." Her choice now was not to give in to despair, not let Daniel understand that she knew, and continue gathering evidence, because at stake was not only her property but her dignity. Because by letting him win, she would betray not only herself but all the women who might follow her, charmed by the same glint in the eyes, the same fake smile. Fury rose in her, pure as a mountain stream, cleansing wounds. This fury was her new strength. The sun rose over the city, painting the room in gray-pink tones. When Victoria made her final decision, she would expose him not for revenge, but for justice, and for the woman she would become after passing through this pain. There are minutes when truth seeps through the veil of lies, like blood through bandages. Inevitably, painfully, pulsing in time with heartbeat. Outside the cafe window, Wet April snow was melting. Marina sat across from Victoria, placing a worn leather folder on the table. Her face, usually lively, mobile, was motionless, like a surgeon's before a complex operation. "Are you sure you're ready to hear this?" she asked, covering the folder with her palm. Victoria pulled her scarf tighter. The recent weeks had taken pounds from her weight and hours from her sleep, leaving shadows under her eyes and a new crease between her brows. "If I could sleep next to him knowing he plans to rob me, then I'm ready for anything," she replied, and was surprised by the firmness of her own voice. Marina nodded and opened the folder. "His real name is Denis Arkadievich Steinberg, though he's used different names. In Kansas City he was Dmitry Arkadievich Stern. In Detroit, David Arkadievich Shuvalov. Where did you get this?" "My editor has connections in the police," Marina shrugged. "And your Daniel has a rich past. 2 wives, Vic. Both left with nothing. First, Elena Suvorova, divorced in 2018. She lost her apartment and business. Second, Angela Grevtsova. Marriage lasted only 8 months. Victoria silently looked at the photos Marina laid out before her. A blonde woman with frightened eyes, similar to herself, like a sister. And the second, also slender, also with long hair, only dark. "He chooses a specific type," Victoria said, feeling nausea rise to her throat. "I'm just another on the list." "Not just." Marina pushed another document toward her. "Your inheritance from grandmother. The apartment downtown you rent out, and the money you saved from its sale. You're an attractive target, Vic." Victoria took a sip of cooling coffee. Before her inner vision flashed a string of memories. Grandmother showing her the old communal apartment on East Side. The notary reading the will. Her crying mother who got nothing due to an old family quarrel. Her own plans to sell the apartment and open a small publishing house. "Now I understand why he hurried the wedding so much," she whispered. "There's more." Marina hesitated. "Arrest Pavlovich Grimov, the person your husband communicates with. He served 7 years for large-scale fraud and was released 2 years ago." Victoria shuddered, remembering the name from the correspondence on Daniel's phone. They've known each other for a long time, apparently, and he has serious connections in the criminal world. Marina lowered her voice. "Such people don't leave witnesses, Vic." A cold wave of fear rolled down her spine. One thing was financial fraud, quite another to deal with a person capable of anything. "You need to leave," Marina insisted. "Drop this game before it's too late. And give him everything I have." Victoria shook her head. "No." The next day Daniel left for a business meeting, and Victoria finally decided on what she'd been planning for a week, to thoroughly search his study. Not just peek into drawers as she'd done before, but methodically check every inch. She started with bookshelves, checking each volume for hidden compartments. Then desk drawers one by one, then the floor clock, massive, with multiple decorative elements. Only after checking all this did she notice the single photograph in the study, a group shot in a modest frame standing on the far shelf. A younger Daniel with longer hair stood embracing a man she immediately recognized from Marina's description. Arrest, broad-shouldered, with a heavy chin and sharp gaze. But what made her freeze was the woman next to them. Blonde with a meek expression. The first wife. Victoria brought the photograph closer to the light. Then she noticed something behind the frame. A thin sheet of paper folded in quarters. Victoria carefully extracted it. An old newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Meridian Investment Fund accused of fraud. In the photo was the same arrest, only younger, in a business suit. She quickly photographed the find and put everything back in place, hearing the sound of an approaching car. That evening, while Daniel worked on his laptop, she quietly observed him. This person she had once considered the love of her life suddenly became alien. She now saw what she hadn't noticed before, the slight artificiality of his smile, the pause before each "I love you," the calculation in every gesture. "I'm just a piece of meat on a hook for him," thought Victoria. And this thought resonated not with pain as before, but with cold fury. Later in the bathroom she called Marina. "I need to find out about the Meridian Fund," she said quietly. Water was running, drowning out her voice from possible listening devices. Paranoia, but justified. "Already looking," Marina replied. "By the way, I found Elena Suvorova, his first wife. She agreed to meet." "When?" "Tomorrow. I'm going with you." When Victoria lay down in bed, her heart pounded as if it was about to burst from her chest. The picture was beginning to take shape. Daniel wasn't just a deceiver. He was a professional predator for whom she had become another prey, and he wouldn't stop at anything. Daniel's hand slid over her thigh, and she barely suppressed the desire to push him away. "What are you thinking about, beautiful?" he whispered, kissing her neck. Victoria found the strength to turn to him, smile, run her fingers over his cheek. "About how lucky I am with you," she lied, and the hatred seething inside gave her words an almost sincere sound. In the darkness of the bedroom she stared at the ceiling, catching the glints of night headlights sliding across it like ghosts. Somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the window were other women like her, deceived, broken, having lost everything. Victoria clenched her teeth. She wouldn't become one of them. She would track down this wolf in human clothing, expose him, and let him pay for everything. Already falling asleep, Victoria suddenly thought, what if she wasn't the first to try to resist? What if others also tried to fight? And where are they now? This thought haunted her in troubled dreams until dawn. The industrial district on the outskirts of Chicago breathed rust and abandonment. Once life bustled here. Machines roared, sirens wailed, workers hurried to shifts. Now only weathered building shells with broken windows remained from former greatness, resembling skulls with empty eye sockets. Marina's car, an old Ford bought by chance from a colleague, lurked in the shadow of a half-ruined fence. Victoria pulled her hood deeper, though the April evening was surprisingly warm. The tremor shaking her body came from within, that special chill caused not by cold but by fear. "Think they'll come here?" she whispered, clutching her phone. Marina nodded, not taking her gaze from the only lit building at the end of the street, a squat warehouse with a brand-new lock on the gates. Elena said they always met in places like this. At first she thought it was related to her husband's business. He dealt with real estate, renovation of old properties. Then she realized it was for something else. The meeting with Daniel's first wife had taken place that morning. Elena, a haggard woman with a dead gaze, looking older than her 35 years, told a story that made Victoria's hair stand on end. A story of love turned into nightmare, of how her husband methodically deprived her of everything: money, apartment, even dignity. And when she tried to resist, threats began. "He's not just a con artist," Elena said, nervously twisting her wedding ring, which for some reason she continued to wear. "He enjoys the process. Other people's humiliation is like a drug to him." Victoria listened and saw in this woman herself in a year, if she didn't stop Daniel now. "You need evidence of his schemes," Elena spoke quietly, struggling to find words. "I tried too but didn't succeed." "What happened?" Marina asked then. Elena just shook her head, and her eyes filled with tears. "Be careful. And never be alone with him when he realizes you know." Now, sitting in the darkness, Victoria remembered these words. The radio in Marina's hands crackled. A signal from the private detective, a former colleague whom her friend had brought into surveillance. "Subject approaching target location," a male voice sounded. "Black BMW. Another car with him. Mercedes. Can't make out the license plate." Victoria felt her heart sink into her stomach. One thing was knowing with her mind, quite another seeing with her own eyes. "Get ready." Marina handed her night vision binoculars. "We need not only to hear but to film them." The cars stopped at the warehouse gates. A predatory silhouette emerged from the BMW, familiar to the last line. From the Mercedes came the bulky arrest and another person Victoria couldn't make out. "Camera ready." Marina was already checking settings on her professional equipment. Victoria nodded, activating the video recording app on her phone. With trembling fingers she pressed record and aimed the camera at the trio disappearing into the building. "We need to get closer," Marina whispered. "We won't hear anything from the car." This was the scariest part of the plan. Victoria knew she needed to move, but her legs seemed rooted to the ground. What if they noticed her? But the thought of the humiliation on Elena's face gave her determination. Nodding, she slipped out of the car after her friend. They crept along the fence, trying to stay in the shadows. Every sound, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the rustle of clothing, her own breathing seemed deafeningly loud to Victoria. The detective, remaining in his car, was backing them up, ready to intervene in case of danger. A half-broken window at basement level turned out to be slightly open. Pressing against the cold concrete wall, they heard voices. Already signed preliminary agreement. It was Daniel's voice. Businesslike, confident. "Only notarization remains. Bank ready to issue loan secured by her apartment as soon as documents are ready." Then a hoarse voice presumably arrests. "As usual, she'll take the loan, transfer it to me as an investment, and in a week there won't be a trace of the money left." Laughter that sent chills down Victoria's spine. "You sure she hasn't gotten suspicious?" This was the third voice, unfamiliar. "After that business with Elena." Daniel's voice sounded condescending, cutting. This one's more naive, softer. "Her ex did a good job, completely destroyed her self-esteem. She clings so desperately to my love that she doesn't see the obvious." Every word was like a blow. Precise, calculated, hitting the most painful spot. Victoria bit her lip until it bled to keep from crying out in pain and fury. "And if she does get suspicious?" the third insisted. "Was a step." Victoria pressed against the wall, afraid the men had approached the window. But no, they just moved around the room. "She won't have time." Daniel's voice sounded almost playful. "As soon as the money is transferred, she becomes unnecessary. I've already looked at property in Thailand. A startup for you, Igor, as agreed. And Arrest's share." "And her?" Arrest asked hoarsely. "Not your concern. She'll just disappear like the others. No traces, no questions." Victoria felt the ground slip from under her feet. Not just deception, not just fraud, they were going to kill her. She froze, and the phone recording the conversation nearly slipped from her suddenly weakened fingers. Marina, noticing her condition, carefully took the phone and hugged her shoulders, bringing her back to reality. "Already scheduled for next Tuesday," Daniel continued. "Notary's our guy, will forge her signature if something goes wrong." Marina looked at the phone screen, recording was running. Then gestured that it was time to retreat. But Victoria froze like a marble statue. Her ears rang, red spots swam before her eyes. She saw her mother bending over her bed when she, 6 years old, was sick with tonsillitis. Saw grandmother kissing her goodbye before death. Saw herself at high school graduation, her first day at the publishing house, the day she met Daniel. Her own life flashed before her eyes like a condemned person on the scaffold, and suddenly she was overwhelmed by such rage, such thirst for life as she had never experienced before. "I won't let you take my future," she thought, digging her nails into her palms to regain control of her body. Carefully, trying not to make noise, they retreated to the car. With each step fear grew, sometimes panicky, making her heart pound in her throat, sometimes cold, paralyzing movement. Already at the car, Victoria could finally breathe. She was shaking as if feverish. Marina hugged her, pressing her close. "We'll handle this," she whispered, though her voice was also trembling. "Now we have evidence. We'll stop them." Victoria didn't respond. Inside her swirled such a mixture of emotions that no words could convey them. Fear, yes, all-consuming, paralyzing, but underneath it like a steel rod, determination was strengthening. "You'll pay for everything," she mentally addressed Daniel, looking at the darkening silhouette of the warehouse where her life's fate was being decided. And at that moment she truly understood Elena's words. He enjoys the process. Victoria almost physically felt the disgusting pleasure her husband got imagining how she, trusting and loving, would sign her own death warrant. Already in the car speeding away from the cursed place, Victoria allowed herself tears. Not of weakness, but of fury. Grandmother used to tell her how women in their village, when the war began, would hide their children and then go to the front, fragile in body but unbreakable in spirit. Now she felt in herself that same determination, born on the edge of life and death. "Now we go to the police?" she asked when she could breathe again. Marina shook her head. "Not yet. People like Arrest and his partner probably have their people everywhere. We need more evidence, so the case is so clear that no one can bury it." Victoria nodded. An inner trembling voice screamed, "Run, hide, save your life." But she made it be silent. She would meet danger face to face. "We continue according to plan," she said, and her voice sounded unexpectedly calm and firm. That night, returning home, she looked at her sleeping husband and thought about the thin line between love and hate. She remembered how she cried with happiness when he put the wedding ring on her finger, and how she cried with horror 2 hours ago, learning he was planning her death. The emotions inside her crystallized, turning into something new, determination untainted by fear. The determination of a woman standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing the only path to salvation wasn't to retreat, but to jump. Surprisingly, how in moments of highest tension the world suddenly slows down, stretches out, as if time is rubber that can be stretched to the limit. In such seconds you see everything with piercing clarity. Cracks in the concrete wall of the old warehouse that formed intricate patterns like a map of an unknown country. A moth circling under a dim streetlight, doomed to fly toward the light, not understanding it would be her downfall. A dewdrop on grass breaking through cracked asphalt, stubborn as life itself. Victoria saw all this in the moment when the phone clenched in her numb fingers slipped from her hands and fell to the ground with a dull thud. This sound, weak, barely distinguishable among other night rustles, seemed to tear the silence like a gunshot. Inside the warehouse, conversation broke off. Heavy, confident footsteps headed toward the window. "What was that?" Daniel's voice sounded so close Victoria felt his breath on her skin, though the wall still separated them. Marina gripped her wrist with such force there would surely be bruises. Her friend's eyes widened, pure, unclouded terror splashing in them. Silently, with only her lips, she formed, "Don't move." A flashlight beam flickered behind the window, slid over glass shards, over the dirty wall, and froze dangerously close to their hiding place. "Someone's there," Daniel said, and Victoria heard something new in his voice, tension bordering on alarm. "Maybe stray dogs." Arrest responded, "There are plenty of them here." Victoria stood pressed against the cold wall, not breathing. Her throat was dry, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed they must hear this beating. All of life narrowed to one point, to the flashlight beam slowly moving very close. "Mom!" flashed through her head. She hadn't called her mother since she was 17 and crashed her father's car. Then too there was a moment of frozen time, the screech of metal, windshield fragments scattering like crystal rain. And that word was the only thing that broke through the stupor. The light beam shifted, ran along the ground near their feet, illuminated the phone lying in dust, and slid on without stopping. "Nothing here." Daniel's voice already sounded calmer. "Let's go, we need to finish." The footsteps moved away from the window. Victoria didn't move, frozen like a statue. Only tremor, fine, merciless, shook her body as if she had fever. "We need to leave," Marina exhaled. "Now." Slowly, infinitely slowly, Victoria bent down and picked up the phone. The screen was cracked, a thin spider web of cracks spreading from center to edges. Something inside broke. What if the recording was lost? What if all evidence had disappeared? They retreated to the car step by step, not allowing themselves to run, afraid to attract attention. Victoria thought about her mother, about her words spoken after that car incident. Fear is normal. What's abnormal is letting it control you. In her coat pocket lay an old copper coin, grandmother's talisman that her mother had given her on her 18th birthday. "Your great-grandmother carried this coin at the front," Mother had said then. She believed copper deflected misfortune. And you know what? She went through the whole war without a scratch. Victoria clutched the coin in her pocket, digging nails into her palm until it hurt, to keep from screaming from tension. Every step was given with such difficulty, as if she were walking knee-deep in sticky swamp. Thoughts tangled, colored spots swam before her eyes. Only the feeling of cool metal in her palm kept her conscious. The detective backing them up helped the girls get into the car. His face was tense, eyes stern like a person accustomed to danger but not to exposing others to it. "Recording intact?" he asked, starting the engine. Victoria tried to unlock the phone. The screen flickered but responded to touch. "Recording saved." She nodded, not trusting her voice. The car smoothly started, taking them away from the warehouse. Only when the lights were left far behind did Victoria finally feel Marina crying next to her in the seat. Quietly, soundlessly, her whole body shuddering. "Forgive me," her friend whispered. "I dragged you into this. They could have. They almost." Victoria hugged her, pressed her close. Strangely, her own eyes remained dry. "Everything's fine," she said, and her voice sounded surprisingly calm. "We have the recording. Now we know exactly what we're dealing with." At home, Marina didn't want to let her go, suggested staying at her place, but Victoria refused. "If I don't come back, he'll suspect something," she explained. "I have to play my role to the end." Before getting out of her friend's car, she allowed herself to show fear for the first time during the entire investigation. "If something happens to me," she began. "Nothing will happen," Marina interrupted, firmly gripping her hand. "I won't allow it. I swear." The house was quiet. Daniel hadn't returned yet. Victoria took a shower, washing off the dust of the old warehouse, the smell of fear, the dirt of this night. She watched water flow down the drain and thought about how her life too could have flowed away just as easily, disappeared without trace. Then she froze in front of the mirror, peering into her own face. The same woman as yesterday and a month ago. Same eyes, same lips, same cheekbones, but inside was a different person. A woman who had faced death and didn't retreat. She heard the sound of the opening door, footsteps in the hallway. Daniel had returned. Taking a deep breath, Victoria put on her mask. Smile, relaxation, sleepiness. "You're still not sleeping." He entered the bedroom smelling of night air and something else she hadn't noticed before. The metallic smell of danger. "Waiting for you," she answered, forcing her voice to sound warm and loving. "How was the meeting?" "Usual." Daniel looked at her more attentively than usual, studying every feature of her face as if searching for something. "And what did you do?" "Worked on text, then watched a series." Victoria approached him, kissed his cheek as she usually did. "Got a little tired." He hugged her, and his hands that perhaps planned her death, pressed her close to him. "You need more rest," he said, and in his voice sounded a note that hadn't been there before, sharp as a razor blade wariness. "You seem kind of tense lately." "Just a difficult project." Victoria smiled, thinking how thin the line between truth and lie, between life and death. When they went to bed, Daniel kept the nightlight on for a long time, looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Victoria felt his gaze even through closed eyelids when she pretended to sleep. That night sleep wouldn't come. She lay listening to her husband's breathing and going through their shared photos in her mind. In the restaurant on their first date, in the park in autumn on their wedding day. In each of them Daniel looked at her with an expression of love and tenderness. How can a person act so convincingly, lie so skillfully? Or maybe he wasn't lying. Maybe in those moments he really felt something. Not love, of course, but some semblance of attachment. And when did it change? When did tenderness turn to calculation? When did she transform from beloved woman to target? Victoria stared at the ceiling with unseeing eyes. Somewhere deep in her soul she understood it wasn't just fear, it was pain. Pain from betrayal, from realizing that everything that seemed real was fake, that all words of love, all kisses, all promises were just tools to achieve a goal. With this pain pulsing somewhere in her chest, she had to live on, share a bed with a person planning her destruction, smile at him at breakfast, kiss him goodbye and not flinch, not betray herself with a single glance, a single careless word. This night became for her a threshold, a boundary between the former Victoria, trusting and open, and the new one alert, ready to fight for her life at any cost. And having crossed this threshold, she could never return. In the morning at breakfast she noticed Daniel looking at her differently. More attentively, more sharply, studying reactions, analyzing every word, as if something in her had changed and he was trying to grasp this change, catch it, understand it. "What are you doing Friday evening?" he asked, stirring his coffee. "I have a meeting with an editor," Victoria answered, buttering toast with the same care she always did. "Cancel it." She froze for a moment, then looked up. "Why?" "I booked us a table at the restaurant where I proposed." Daniel smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Anniversary, remember?" The anniversary was in 2 weeks. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. He was testing her. Did she know? Did she remember? "Of course I remember," she answered with the same smile she'd given him a year ago when she said yes. "Just thought we'd celebrate on the actual day. Wanted to surprise you early." Daniel leaned toward her across the table, took her hand. "And then I'll have another gift for you." In his eyes was something new, dark, deep, dangerous. Victoria looked into those eyes and saw her death in them. "Can't wait," she said. And at that moment something strange happened. Her smile became genuinely sincere, because now she knew for certain. There would be no anniversary, no gift. By Friday, Daniel Arkadievich Steinberg would be under police surveillance. And it would be she smiling through tears of relief, through the pain of shattered illusions, but with firm knowledge that she had survived, won, saved herself. For now, a thin line between danger and salvation, between truth and lies. A line she had to walk, balancing over an abyss, not allowing herself a single wrong step. Women learn to wear masks long before they understand they're doing it. Smile when it hurts, seem weaker so as not to frighten, pretend to be stupider to fit in. Victoria had put on and taken off masks since childhood. Daughter who doesn't want to upset parents with her anxieties, student hiding fear of the future, lover concealing irritation behind tenderness. But never before had a mask grown into her skin like now, when every touch of her husband made her insides twist into a tight knot of revulsion. Living with a person planning your death and pretending nothing has changed is like slowly drowning in molasses. Every day, every hour, every minute she suffocated, and no one except Marina could notice it. "How do you endure it?" her friend asked when they met in a cafe far enough from Victoria's home and work to exclude accidental meeting with Daniel. Victoria stirred sugar in her tea, watching crystals dissolve, disappear, become invisible, but still change the drink's taste. Just like lies. Imperceptible but poisoning everything. "I imagine it's not me," she finally answered. "That I'm watching a movie about a woman who must deceive her murderer husband to survive. And in a way I admire her, her strength, her ability not to give herself away." Marina looked at her with anxiety she couldn't hide. In her gaze Victoria read, "What if you've gotten too well into this role? What if one day you can't take it off?" "Not long left," she said instead. "The recording of their conversation is strong evidence, but we need something more. Something that directly connects him to criminal intent. Messages, documents." Daniel had become more careful. He never left his phone unattended. Locked his computer with a password he changed regularly. Kept documents in a safe. But yesterday Victoria noticed he'd developed a new habit. Long soaks in the bathtub after work with a book and glass of whiskey. A small weakness that could be used. "I have a plan," she said, leaning closer. At home Victoria prepared dinner. Roast with thyme and rosemary that Daniel especially loved. Set the table, lit candles, opened a bottle of red wine. "What's the occasion?" he asked, entering the kitchen and surveying the romantic setting. "None," she smiled, suppressing tremor when his hand slid over her waist. "Just missed you. We spend so little time together lately." Something like suspicion flashed in his eyes, but he quickly suppressed that expression, replacing it with a smile. "You always know how to make me happy," he said, kissing her neck. That kiss made her nauseous, but Victoria didn't allow herself to pull away. Mother once told her, "If you can take a hit and stay on your feet, you belong in the ring. If you fall, you have no business being there." She wouldn't fall. Not now. During dinner she tried to maintain light conversation, as in times when she still believed in their love. Talked about work, asked about his affairs, laughed at jokes. Poured wine, making sure his glass never emptied. Daniel's phone lay at the edge of the table, screen down. Twice it vibrated with silent notifications, and Daniel threw brief glances at it but didn't pick it up. "Maybe you should check," Victoria asked when it happened a third time. "What if it's important?" "Nothing that can't wait," he answered, looking into her eyes with that expression that used to make her heart skip with happiness, now only causing a chill of fear. After dinner she suggested he take a bath with bubbles, aromatic oils, and candles as he liked. And while Daniel relaxed in hot water, she cleaned the table, washed dishes, creating an even background of household sounds that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Entering the bathroom with a glass of whiskey for him, she noticed the phone lying on the sink edge. Her heart began beating so hard it seemed Daniel must hear this pounding. "I'm thinking of finishing early Friday," she said, sitting on the tub's edge and handing him the glass. "We'll have time for a glass of champagne before the restaurant." "Sounds tempting." Daniel smiled, and for a moment she thought she saw genuine warm affection in his eyes. Or was it just candlelight play? They talked for a few more minutes, then she left, ostensibly to make them tea. In the hallway Victoria leaned against the wall, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. This was the most difficult moment, when you need to act despite fear. She returned to the bathroom, trying to step silently. Daniel lay with closed eyes, completely relaxed. The phone was still on the sink. Victoria reached out and carefully took it, feeling like a thief in her own home. On tiptoe she snuck to the bedroom, closed the door, and only then allowed herself to exhale. Her hands shook as she entered the code 1805. Their wedding day, the day she unknowingly signed her death warrant. She opened the messenger, found the contact A, and began viewing messages. Documents received. Notary confirmed Tuesday meeting. Your side cash as agreed. Waiting for address confirmation from you, and then today's message. Meeting at 9 p.m. sharp at the site. No delays. Need to discuss final details. Victoria quickly took screenshots, sent them to her email, and began checking other applications. Opened the planner and saw Tuesday's entry. Notary 2 p.m. sharp. Power of attorney v. Her heart skipped a beat. Here was the plan. Force her to sign a power of attorney allowing control of her property. And then... She didn't want to think about what then. Water splashed in the bathroom. Daniel was finishing his bath. Victoria hastily closed all applications, returned the phone to the state it was in, and tiptoed back to the bathroom. Her hands were still shaking when she put the phone on the sink, trying to place it exactly as it had been before. At that moment Daniel opened his eyes and looked at her. "What are you doing?" he asked. And in his voice was that same note of suspicion Victoria so feared to hear. Her heart stopped. Her mouth went dry. But years of pretending, years of smiles through tears, years of everything's fine, don't worry, had taught her to lie. "Brought you a towel," she answered, pointing to the fresh towel that had actually been hanging there since morning. "Thought it might be getting cold." Daniel looked at her with a long gaze, and Victoria felt everything inside freeze with fear. If he guessed, if he noticed. "My caring one," he said finally, and in his smile was something she couldn't decipher. "Don't know what I did to deserve such a wife." "Nothing," thought Victoria, smiling back. "Absolutely nothing." Later, when Daniel fell asleep, she lay next to him staring at the ceiling. His hand lay on her stomach in a possessive gesture, as if even in sleep he asserted his right to her. Victoria thought about her mother, about grandmother, about countless generations of women who stared into the night next to men they couldn't trust but on whom their fate depended. Somewhere deep in her soul, beneath fear, beneath the pain of betrayal, beneath revulsion, she felt connection with them, an invisible thread stretched through time from heart to heart. "I'll manage," she whispered soundlessly into the darkness. "I'll survive and never again let anyone make me a victim." Daniel's hand twitched in sleep, and his fingers clenched the fabric of her nightgown. Even unconscious, he tried to possess her. Victoria closed her eyes, imagining how in a few days these hands would be gripping prison bars. That's all that helped her get through the night, the promise of dawn that would finally end her nightmares. Daniel's car keys jingled in the hallway, an ordinary sound that used to mean only that a loved one had come home. Now every click of the lock, every creak of floorboards took on new ominous meaning, as if the house had turned into a minefield where every wrong step could be the last. "I'll be late today," Daniel said, kissing Victoria on the cheek. His touch made everything inside freeze, but she forced the corners of her lips up. "Important meeting." "Of course, darling." Her voice sounded so natural she almost believed in the sincerity of her own words. "I wanted to work on the manuscript anyway." He looked at her, slightly squinting, as if trying to look behind her usual smile and see thoughts hiding behind it. Victoria held his gaze, direct, open, the same as on the day she vowed faithfulness to him. "Love you," he said finally, and she answered the same, feeling these words once full of meaning wear away to empty shells. Victoria watched from the window as his black BMW disappeared around the corner. Only when the car vanished from sight did she let her shoulders drop and her breathing become ragged and torn. Her hand reached for the phone. 3 rings, and Marina's familiar voice answered. "He left." "Yes. We have 2 hours, no more." The wait seemed like eternity. Victoria couldn't find a place for herself. Straightened cushions on the sofa, sorted books on the shelf, checked messages that weren't there. When there was a quiet knock at the door, she flinched though she'd been waiting for this knock. Marina brought with her not only determination but professional tools. A miniature camera, lock-picking device, small document scanner. "Where's your friend?" Victoria asked, looking around. "Waiting outside." Watching the situation, Marina spoke curtly, businesslike. "If Daniel returns early, he'll alert us." They went up to the 2nd floor to the study that had always been off-limits to Victoria. "Sorry, darling, but there are important documents there. Business secrets, you understand," Daniel would say with a disarming smile. And she understood, believed, trusted. The door gave way surprisingly easily. "He's overconfident," Marina muttered, putting the pick back in her pocket. "Too sure you'd never dare enter." The study was sterile clean. Not a speck of dust on dark furniture. Not a single sheet of paper on the mahogany desk. Victoria froze for a moment, inhaling her husband's scent, a mixture of expensive cologne and something that had always seemed to her the musky aroma of ambition. Only now did she realize it was the smell of lies. "Where do we start?" she asked, surveying the room. "With the safe." Marina approached a painting on the wall, an original by a little-known artist Daniel had acquired at auction. They're usually hidden behind these. Moving the heavy frame, they indeed discovered a small built-in safe with a digital lock. "How will we open it?" Victoria felt hope melting. "We don't have the code." "Relax." Marina was already taking out some device resembling a small tablet. "My friend lent it, reads combinations." Minutes flowed like molasses. Thick, slow. Victoria examined the study while Marina worked on the safe, running fingers over book spines, many of which had never been opened. Just decoration creating the image of an intellectual. She studied photos on walls. Daniel against urban landscapes. Always alone, no friends, no family. "Who are you really?" she thought, looking at the handsome face of the man to whom she'd given her heart, her life, her future. "Got it!" Marina exclaimed, and the metal safe door opened with a quiet click. Inside lay folders. Neat, labeled in Daniel's calligraphic handwriting. Real estate, finance, investments. And one at the very bottom without a label. A thin gray folder easily overlooked. Victoria took it out, laid it on the desk and opened it. Her heart stopped, then began beating double time. Passports. 3 different ones with different names but Daniel's photo. Birth certificate. Bank cards in various names. And photographs, ones that made her blood run cold. Elena with bruises under her eyes, standing next to a notary, signing some papers. Another woman, presumably the second wife, with a look frozen in terror. And herself, Victoria, sleeping in their bed, unaware she was being watched, laughing with Marina in a cafe, standing by the window in thought. Dozens of shots taken secretly. "My God," Marina whispered, looking over her shoulder. "He was watching you all this time." But the scariest thing wasn't this. In the folder lay a sheet of paper with neat list titled Project Stages. Meeting and gaining trust. Completed. Marriage. Completed. Opening joint account. Completed. Power of attorney for real estate. In progress. Transfer of funds to offshore planned. Elimination of V. After signing planned. The last item was circled in red pen. Victoria's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, unable to tear her gaze from these lines. Cold, methodical, devoid of any humanity. Her life broken down by points and turned into a project. "He's a monster." Marina's voice trembled with rage and horror. "No," Victoria replied quietly. "He's human, and that's scarier." They quickly scanned documents one by one. Victoria's hands mechanically turned pages while her mind refused to accept the reality of what was happening. As if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Tragic but distant. In this gray folder was stored not only her future but the past. Evidence that Daniel had done the same thing to other women. Financial reports, fraud schemes, legal documents from Apex firm with notarial seals, written in language she barely understood, but whose essence was crystal clear: systematic destruction of lives for money. Grandmother's apartment on East Side figured in one of the documents as Object Number 17, with a note, after power of attorney processing, immediate sale. Among the papers were other names. Men, women, presumably victims or accomplices. Arrest's name repeated more often than others, next to sums, addresses, dates. When the last document was scanned, Marina carefully folded everything back into the folder, trying to preserve the order they were found in. But Victoria suddenly held her hand. "Wait." She took a small piece of paper from her pocket, on which she'd written in block letters. "I know everything, Daniel, and soon everyone will know." "Are you out of your mind?" Marina whispered. "He'll realize you were here." "Let him realize." Victoria's eyes held determination bordering on recklessness. "But only when we're ready, when nothing can stop us anymore." She placed the note among the documents, deep enough that Daniel wouldn't discover it immediately, but would definitely find it in the coming days. "This is dangerous." Marina looked at her with concern. "My whole life with him is dangerous," Victoria replied. "But now I want him to feel what it's like to live in fear too." They returned the folder to the safe, closed the door, hung the painting back in place. Each movement careful, measured, like in a dance where one wrong step could cost a life. Going down the stairs, Victoria suddenly stopped, pressing her hand to her chest. "What?" Marina asked worriedly. "I think I just realized." "He was planning to kill me," she said, and these words, spoken aloud, took on terrible reality. "The person who swore to love me until the end of life wanted that life to end as soon as possible." Marina hugged her, holding her close. In this embrace was that sisterly support that can't be expressed in words. "We'll endure, we'll handle it, we're together." Returning to the living room, they once more checked that everything was in place. No traces of their presence remained. The house's silence, once cozy, now seemed ominous, as if the walls themselves kept a secret ready to spill out at any moment. Before leaving, Marina hugged her friend once more. "Be careful and remember, you're not alone." Victoria nodded, watching the door close behind the only person she could still trust, then returned to her desk, opened her laptop, and began working on the manuscript, creating an illusion of normalcy, weaving echoes of her despair into the text, turning her own pain into a story that perhaps someone, someday, would read and recognize themselves in. Hearing the sound of an approaching car, she took a deep breath and put on the familiar mask of loving wife. But something had changed. Inside, beneath layers of fear and pain, a new feeling was born. Not hope yet, but its harbinger. Knowledge that the end was near, that all the graves Daniel had dug for her and other women were uncovered, and soon he would have to answer for each one. Attorney Nikolai Stepanovich Korshunov's office smelled of leather, paper, and that special elusive aroma of anxious waiting familiar to every woman who had ever crossed the threshold of a government institution with pain in her heart and hope for justice. Victoria sat on the edge of an armchair, hands folded on her knees like a model student, though inside her a hurricane raged. Marina sat beside her. Silent support, kindred soul, wordlessly understanding the depth of her fear. Their fingers intertwined in the ancient gesture of female solidarity, holding the strength of many generations. The attorney, a lean man with penetrating but kind eyes, leafed through documents, setting the most important ones in a separate pile. His hands, marked with age spots, moved with unexpected gentleness, as if handling not evidence against a dangerous criminal, but fragile, priceless relics. "This is enough, Victoria Andreevna," he said finally, looking up. "Conversation recordings, document photos, financial machinations. Quite sufficient for an arrest warrant." Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. Not trusting her voice, she remained silent, letting Marina speak. "What now?" her friend asked. "They'll just arrest him." "Not exactly." The attorney removed his glasses and tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. In this gesture was felt the weight of decades spent in battles for justice. People like Arrest Gromov usually have their people in the agencies. "We need to act carefully. I'll contact Colonel Ignatiev. He's from a special department. He can be trusted." Victoria thought about her mother, about how she taught her to stand up for herself in the face of injustice. "Don't be silent, sweetheart," she used to say, braiding her hair before school. "Words are your defense. And silence. It's like a shadow where all our fears hide." But now she lacked words. They were lost in the labyrinth of her wounded soul. "When will this end?" she asked quietly. And in this simple question was contained all the pain of a woman whose heart had been turned into a battlefield. The attorney looked at her with unexpected tenderness. "Soon, Victoria Andreevna, but you need to be ready for a little more fear before the end. They'll organize an operation, catch them red-handed. Until that moment, you must behave as usual." These words echoed in her soul, as usual. But what is usual for a woman who learned her husband plans her death? How can she smile at a person who scheduled her life by program points? Waiting is like slow dying. Minute by minute, heartbeat by heartbeat. Victoria lived as if between two worlds. In one, she prepared dinner, discussed weekend plans, kissed her husband goodbye, knowing each touch might be the last, not for her but for him. In the other, every few hours she exchanged encrypted messages with Marina, received brief updates from the attorney, prepared for the inevitable finale. At night, lying next to Daniel, she looked at moonlight breaking through curtains and remembered grandmother's fairy tales. "Every woman has a sleeping she-wolf inside," grandmother used to say, fingering her beads with gnarled fingers. "Don't wake her without need, but if life forces you, don't hold her back." Her she-wolf had awakened, alert, hungry, ready to defend what belonged to her by right. Her life, her dignity, her future. Thursday brought a message from the attorney. "Operation today. 9 p.m. sharp. Warehouse. Be at home." Victoria stood at the window watching Daniel get into his car. He waved at her. Casual, habitual gesture of a person confident in his power. She waved back, and the smile on her lips was genuine, the first sincere smile in many weeks. The evening dragged endlessly. Victoria tried to read, but lines blurred before her eyes. Turned on TV but perceived not a word. At some point she sat at the piano. Daniel's wedding gift, which she almost never played. Her fingers found a melody by themselves, a lullaby her mother used to sing in childhood. Simple, pure sounds filled the house, driving away shadows accumulated over months of fear. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Message from Marina. Turn on the news. Victoria rushed to the TV, switched to the news channel. Special report, shaky camera, police cars with flashing lights, the familiar warehouse. Operation to detain criminal group engaged in large-scale fraud. Arrested was crime figure Arrest Grumov, as well as. Victoria's heart stopped, then began beating double time. The screen showed the cordoned area, police in bulletproof vests leading people in handcuffs. Among them she recognized the third man from the warehouse, the one Daniel called Igor. But Daniel himself wasn't among the detained. Her phone rang, unknown number. She answered with trembling fingers. Victoria Andreevna. Colonel Ignatiev. The voice was sharp, alarmed. Where are you now? At home, she replied, feeling everything inside turn cold. What's wrong? Leave immediately. Steinberg escaped, and apparently he knows about your involvement. These words stunned her like a blow. Until this moment she believed the nightmare would end today, that the chains binding her would collapse. But the nightmare was only beginning. She rushed to the bedroom, grabbed the pre-packed bag. In the hallway, her hands automatically reached for the photograph on the wall. She with her parents, 2 months before mother died of cancer. She tore the photo from its hook and put it in the bag. Already leaving, Victoria paused for a moment. The house where she had been so happy and so unhappy at the same time now seemed alien. Scenery for a play long removed from repertory. She slammed the door and ran to her car. Starting the engine she saw, or did it seem, a black BMW silhouette flashing at the end of the street. Her heart pounded in her throat, hands barely held the wheel. She turned on headlights and pulled out of the yard, feeling adrenaline turn fear into desperate determination. In the rearview mirror, the black BMW grew as if materializing from her worst nightmares. Daniel had found her. The chase began. Victoria gripped the wheel tighter, pressing the gas pedal. At that moment all doubts evaporated. Inside rose ancient, primal fury. The fury of a woman cornered, a woman who had lost too much to retreat. The chains were broken, but freedom had never been so dangerous. There are moments that divide life into before and after, elusive turning points, after crossing which you can never return. For Victoria, such a point wasn't marrying Daniel, not discovering his betrayal, not even the night chase. It was the moment when she turned the car around. The dark ribbon of road stretched before her, promising escape, safety, salvation. Daniel's car pursued her, headlights cutting through darkness like a night predator's eyes. Everything in Victoria screamed. Run, hide, survive. But something deeper than survival instinct, perhaps that same she-wolf grandmother spoke of, made her sharply spin the wheel. Not a victim cornered, not prey fleeing the hunter. Enough. Victoria returned home a few minutes before Daniel. That time was enough to call Colonel Ignatiev and say, "He's returning home. I'm here to send someone." Enough to take her father's hunting knife from the bedroom safe. Not to use it but to feel protected. Enough to go to the window and see the familiar black BMW screech to a halt at the front steps. Everything around seemed to slow down. Victoria watched Daniel get out of the car. Not the confident, brilliant financier she knew, but a man on the edge, with disheveled hair and a face twisted with rage. She heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps crossed the hallway, climbed the stairs. Victoria stood in the middle of the living room, straight as a bowstring, when he burst inside. For her, this was a moment of strange, piercing recognition. Not of the Daniel standing before her now. Him she didn't know and didn't want to know. She recognized herself, the real Victoria who had always lived inside, patiently waiting for the hour of her birth. "You," he breathed, and in that single word seethed such hatred that the air seemed to tremble. "You led them to us." Victoria was silent. Not from fear, she felt strangely calm. She mentally began counting. How many minutes would police need to get here? 15. She needed to buy time. "Yes," she answered simply, surprised by her voice's firmness. "It was me." His face contorted. The mask of charm melted like wax, revealing what had been hidden beneath all this time. And Victoria saw the real Daniel for the first time. Cruel, calculating, merciless monster in human form. Know what happens to those who betray me. He took a step toward her. And another. Ask Elena. All right, you can't. She drowned during our lake trip. Tragic accident. A chill ran down Victoria's spine, but she didn't retreat. The dead woman, the one with lifeless eyes they'd met with, wasn't Elena. The real Elena lay at the bottom of a lake, and Daniel had used a double to pull off his schemes. You killed her, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel laughed, a sound that turned her insides to ice. She brought it on herself. Started digging, asking questions. Just like you. He came closer. Now only the coffee table separated them. But with you I wasn't careful enough. Overestimated your naivety. He spoke, and before Victoria unfolded a picture of her future that this man had so carefully planned, power of attorney signed in the accomplice notary's office. All her accounts emptied in one night, trip to the same lake where she wouldn't be able to escape. You're not the first, you know, Daniel continued, circling the table. And not the last. Ones like you, with trauma from past relationships. With thirst for love and recognition, perfect targets. You want so badly to believe in fairy tales that you stick your heads in the noose yourselves. His words cut deeper than he could imagine because they held a grain of truth. She had searched for love so desperately she'd forgotten about self-preservation. You're right, Victoria said, taking a step back. I wanted to believe. I loved you. Loved. He smirked, and for a moment she again saw that Daniel she'd fallen in love with, charming with a mischievous smile. It lasted only a second, then the mask fell again. You loved an image I created. Puppet, a marionette. Not me. But was there a real you? She asked, retreating another step, luring him deeper into the room, farther from the door. Or only masks, one over another? Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, something more complex. As if she'd touched a sore spot whose existence he himself didn't suspect. What difference does it make? He shrugged. What difference does it make to you now, Vic? You understand you won't leave here alive. She looked at the wall clock. 6 minutes had passed since her call. She needed to keep stalling. And those women in the photographs. She forced her voice to sound calm, though inside everything contracted with horror. Did you kill them too? Not all. He shrugged with frightening indifference. Some were lucky. They just lost everything, including their sanity. Angela, for example. Sweet Angela, who dreamed so much of a big family of children. She's in a psychiatric clinic now, counting crows outside the window. Thinks they're our unborn children. The cruelty with which he spoke about this made Victoria shudder. Not just a predator getting food, a sadist enjoying others' pain. Why? She asked. And in this question was all the pain of a woman faced with unmotivated cruelty, with that absolute evil impossible to comprehend. Money, of course. He laughed as if surprised by her naivety. All the ladies I chose possessed certain financial potential. She remembered grandmother's apartment, the saved money, drops in the ocean compared to truly wealthy women's fortunes. Yet this man was ready to take her life for them. But that's not all, is it? Victoria looked directly into his eyes, and something in her gaze made him freeze. Money isn't the only reason. Think you're so smart. He took another step toward her. Now less than a meter separated them. I think you hate women, she said quietly. All of us. Because we can feel what you're incapable of experiencing. Because inside us is what you lack. The ability to truly love. His face twisted with rage. His hand shot toward her throat with such speed she couldn't retreat. Fingers clenched around her neck, cutting off air. She couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. Black spots swam before her eyes. At that moment she remembered her mother, not young and healthy, but exhausted by illness, clinging to every minute of life with desperate stubbornness. Don't you dare give up, Vicky, she'd say, already knowing she was doomed. Whatever happens, fight to the end. Victoria struck. Not with her fist, oh no. Their difference in physical strength was too great. She struck with words, the only weapon she had left. "This is the end, Daniel," she croaked, feeling fingers tighten harder. "It's over. The recordings are with police. Everything. Your victims will be avenged." His grip loosened. On his face appeared an expression she'd never seen before: fear. Real, animal fear of a cornered person with nowhere to run. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was no confidence in his voice. At the bottom of the lake, she could barely draw air into her burning lungs. "Where Elena is, police are already there. They'll find everything." She didn't know for certain if her guess was correct, but instinct told her he wouldn't have taken the body far. Too overconfident, too convinced of his own invulnerability. The expression on his face told her she'd hit the mark. Daniel released her and stepped back, wild eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Then he rushed for the door but stopped at the threshold, turning back. "This isn't the end, Vic," he hissed through clenched teeth. "I'll find you. Wherever you are, I'll find you." At that moment, when he was ready to dash from the room, a deafening crash sounded. The front door flew off its hinges, and uniformed people with ready weapons burst into the house. "Police! Everyone stay where you are." Daniel froze as if nailed to the floor. Then he jerked toward the window, but it was too late. Two officers twisted him, pressing against the wall while a third read his rights. Victoria watched this scene as if from the side. The numbness that gripped her body wouldn't let her cry or scream. Only when Colonel Ignatiev's familiar figure appeared nearby, only when his voice asked, "Victoria Andreevna, are you all right?" Only then did a wave of hot tears cover her completely. Daniel was being led from the house in handcuffs. At the threshold he turned, and their eyes met for the last time. A stranger, enemy, monster she had once kissed, to whom she'd given her body, soul, life. "You'll never really be free of me," he said quietly, but she heard every word. "I'll forever remain in your nightmares, Vic." She watched him being led away, the police car door closing, flashing lights painting the street in red and blue, and suddenly understood he was right. Part of her remained in those hopes and dreams they'd built together, in lullabies she'd mentally sung to their unborn children, in plans for a future she'd so sincerely believed in. But now that part had to die so the rest of Victoria could live on. The sirens faded in the distance. The house emptied. Only the colonel remained, politely waiting by the door while she gathered the most necessary things. Tomorrow would bring a long day of testimonies, identifications, formalities. Passing the bedroom, Victoria stopped at the threshold. Here she had been so happy and so unhappy. Here she'd learned to love and hate, trust and suspect. Here she'd lost and found herself again. "We won't be coming back here," she said quietly to her reflection in the mirror. "We're leaving." And for the first time in long weeks, something like hope stirred inside her. Not bright, blinding joy, no. Quiet confidence that the worst was behind, and therefore ahead could only be light. The courtroom reminded Victoria of a theater. Same rows of seats, same hushed atmosphere of waiting before the show began. Only instead of a curtain there was a massive door through which they brought defendants, and all eyes were directed not at the stage but at the woman with scratches on her neck in a strict gray suit she'd bought especially for this day. She felt these gazes on her skin, sharp as needles, curious, sympathetic, condemning. How could she not see? Read in some. Poor thing, she was so unlucky, said others. But was it bad luck or payment for blindness? For seeking love so desperately she forgot about caution. Mother's watch on her wrist quietly counted seconds. Its ticking used to soothe. Now it seemed alarming, like a countdown before explosion. Victoria didn't know if she was ready to see him. The man who had been her husband, her executioner, her mirror reflecting all her weaknesses and fears. Marina sat beside her, her hand firmly squeezing her friend's fingers, like back in childhood when they jumped from cliffs into the river, hearts pounding as they counted. 1, 2, 3. And now, a moment before Daniel's appearance, Victoria felt that same chill in her stomach, same anticipation of falling into the unknown. The door opened. He was brought in handcuffs, thin, haggard, with shadows under his eyes, a person no longer able to play the role of successful financier, stripped of all masks and costumes. Their eyes met across the hall, a brief electric flash of recognition and rejection simultaneously. In Daniel's eyes flashed hatred mixed with strange, almost intimate tenderness. After all, no one knew her like he did. No one had seen her so vulnerable, so crushed. Victoria didn't look away. Not today, not here, never again. All this time I thought my strength was in the ability to endure, flashed through her head. But it turns out real strength is in the ability to say enough. The trial lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which Daniel Arkadievich Steinberg's, or Denis's, or Dimitri's. This person had as many names as lives he'd destroyed. Past was turned inside out like pockets of an old coat. It turned out Elena really was dead. Her remains were found at the bottom of that very lake. And the woman Victoria and Marina had met turned out to be an actress hired to play the victim's role when necessary. Angela was also found. Not in a psychiatric clinic as Daniel claimed, but in a small town near Rochester, where she lived under a false name, hiding from her former husband in constant fear that he would one day find her and finish what he'd started. But the hardest day for Victoria was when she gave testimony. To stand before the court, before dozens of eyes, before parents who'd flown in from Portland after learning what happened, and tell about her humiliation, pain, blindness. It was like peeling off skin layer by layer, exposing nerves. Daniel watched her then with barely concealed smirk as if saying, "You can tell them facts, but you'll never convey what was between us, that power I had over you, how you melted in my hands." And she almost broke, almost. But then her gaze fell on the first row where her mother sat aged, with new wrinkles brought by years and worry for her daughter. Tears stood in her eyes, but her facial expression spoke clearer than any words. "I believe in you. You're stronger than you think." And Victoria found strength to finish. To tell everything without concealment, not as a victim lamenting her fate, but as a survivor who had passed through hell and returned to tell others about it. The trial's last day was rainy. Streams drummed against the courthouse windows as if nature itself was trying to wash away all the dirt, all the pain that had spilled within these walls over the past weeks. The verdict wasn't unexpected, but still sounded like thunder. 15 years imprisonment for large-scale fraud, physical violence, and Elena Suvarova's murder. Daniel heard it with a stone face. Only the muscles on his jaw betrayed the storm raging inside. "Defendant, do you have anything to say to the court before being sent to correctional facility?" The judge's dry voice echoed through the hall. Daniel slowly rose, surveyed those present, and stopped at Victoria. "Nothing that was between us was real," he said with a cold smirk, "except your love. You loved me for real, Vic, and you'll remember until the end of your days." Words calculated to wound, to poison the moment of justice's triumph. But Victoria looked at this broken man and felt not pain, not hatred, not even pity, only deep, infinite tiredness and desire to never see his face again. When they led him away, she didn't watch. Instead, she turned to her parents, to Marina, to people who truly loved her even when she'd forgotten how to love herself. Leaving the courthouse, Victoria raised her face to the sky. The rain had stopped, and sun peeked through cloud breaks. Timid, spring-like, promising warmth. Raindrops on her eyelashes mixed with tears. Not of grief, not relief, but of some new, still unnamed feeling. This was the moment when shackles finally fell away. Not with loud ringing like in movies, but quietly, imperceptibly, like husks that had too long constrained a sprout now able to reach for light. She was no longer the Victoria who dreamed of a prince on a white horse. Nor was she the crushed woman who discovered betrayal in her own bedroom closet. She was someone new, the sum of all she'd experienced, all mistakes and victories, all scars and healings. Like a broken mirror that can't be restored to its former state, but from whose fragments you can create a mosaic, beautiful precisely in its imperfection, its story captured in every crack. She was whole. For the first time in a long, very long time. St. Petersburg greeted Victoria with rain fine, almost imperceptible, but penetrating to the bone. She hadn't taken an umbrella when leaving her new apartment, a tiny studio in an old house in the Petrograd district, bought with money from selling grandmother's East Side apartment. Thanks to the lawyer's intervention, this property remained hers, the only victory among so many losses. She wanted to feel this rain on her skin, wanted to understand if she was still alive, still capable of feeling something besides that dull, aching pain that had settled under her ribs a year ago and since then had become so familiar it was almost unnoticed. This city didn't know her story. No one here followed her with sympathetic glances, whispered behind her back, asked awkward questions. Here Victoria could be anyone, an editor at a small publishing house that produced children's books, a neighbor who politely greeted on the stairwell, a cafe visitor who always ordered cappuccino with cinnamon. Anyone except that same woman from the sensational trial. A year had passed. A whole eternity contained in 365 sunrises and sunsets. Sometimes Victoria felt she'd lived several lives in that year, and sometimes that she still stood in the bedroom closet, frozen with horror, listening to the person she loved plot her death. Autumn Nevsky was crowded and noisy, but Victoria didn't feel part of this crowd. She walked as if separated by invisible film, an observer recording details but not participating in life's general flow. However, this detachment wasn't painful. Rather, it resembled an attentive editor's habit of noticing small things, seeing the big picture without getting lost in details. The stray dog cafe hid in the depths of a courtyard you had to descend narrow stairs to reach. Marina was already waiting there in the corner, at a table lit by a small desk lamp with amber shade. At sight of her friend, her face lit up with a smile mixing joy of meeting with worry and appraising gaze. How was she holding up? Were wounds healing? "You've lost weight," Marina said instead of greeting, hugging Victoria tightly. "And grew your hair out." Victoria ran her hand through hair now falling below her shoulders. Daniel used to like when she wore it short. Said it emphasized her eyes and cheekbones, and she'd obediently cut it. Now every additional inch was like a symbol. Another step away from the past, another day of freedom. "And you're still the same," Victoria replied, sitting across from her. But it wasn't entirely true. Marina looked calmer, more confident. The wariness that lived in her eyes during their dangerous investigation had disappeared. "How's New York? How's work?" The conversation flowed unevenly at first, with pauses and awkward transitions. They talked about weather, Marina's new project, an investigation into human trafficking, Victoria's apartment and publishing house. But both felt this was just warm-up before the main thing they'd met for. "So how are you really?" Marina finally asked, setting down her coffee cup. "Not for the record, not for parents, not for the therapist, for me." Victoria looked at her hands, thin editor's fingers that now sometimes trembled in moments of agitation. On her wrist was still visible a thin scar trace of handcuffs Daniel had chained her to the radiator with during that last night before police burst into the house. She rarely remembered this. "I'm moving forward," she answered finally. "It's like learning to walk again. At first every step is so difficult you want to just lie down and not get up. But then it gets a little easier and easier still. And one fine day you discover you've walked a whole block without even thinking about it." Marina nodded, not interrupting. In her gaze Victoria saw that understanding she found neither in her parents, too frightened, too guilty for not protecting her, nor in the therapist, too professional, too detached. Only Marina, who had walked every step of this path with her, could truly understand. "I don't wake up every night from nightmares anymore," Victoria continued, watching raindrops slide down window glass, leaving winding trails. "Now it happens once a week, maybe soon it'll be once a month." She paused, then added, "And I've started feeling again. You know, when everything ended it was like someone turned off the lights inside. Nothing, no joy, no sorrow. Just emptiness. As if all my ability to feel anything had been exhausted. And now, today I saw a kitten in a window across the street and smiled. Just like that, involuntarily. It was strange but right." Marina reached across the table and squeezed her friend's hand. Without words, without sentimentality. Just human warmth Victoria so needed. Know what I realized this year? Victoria asked when they brought dessert. Cheesecake for her, tiramisu for Marina. That the scariest thing isn't what he did to me, but that I allowed it to happen. No, don't misunderstand me, she quickly added, noticing her friend tense. I don't blame myself. But now, looking back, I see all those moments when intuition screamed at me. Run! And I made it shut up. All those warning signs I ignored because I wanted so badly to believe in a fairy tale. Marina nodded, remembering how she herself had tried to warn her friend, and how she'd backed down, not wanting to cloud her happiness. We always know the truth, Victoria said quietly, somewhere deep inside. But sometimes it's so scary to acknowledge that truth that we prefer living in lies, and then we pay for it. But you survived, Marina reminded her. You didn't just survive, you won. Not everyone would have had the strength for that. Victoria shook her head. I don't feel like a winner. I feel like a shipwreck survivor who reached shore and now has to decide what to do next. Build a new ship or stay on land forever. They talked until the cafe closed about the past, present, how their views on life, relationships, trust had changed. Victoria told how she now valued simple things. Morning coffee, smell of book pages, sound of rain on the roof, how she'd learned to listen to herself, not drown out her inner voice but trust it. How she'd begun rebuilding relationships with her parents. Complex but more honest than before. Have you seen him since then? Marina asked when they left the cafe and rain enveloped them in its damp veil. Victoria knew who she meant. No, only in a newspaper photo when they wrote about the sentence. She fastened her coat, raising the collar. And you know what's strange? I looked at him and didn't recognize him. As if that person in the defendant's dock had nothing in common with the one I loved. As if all this happened not to me but to someone else. They passed through the courtyard arch, emerging onto Broadway flooded with evening lights. People hurried about their business, hiding under umbrellas, pulling up hoods, diving into subway and buses. Sometimes I think, Victoria continued, shouting over traffic noise, love is both curse and gift simultaneously. It makes us vulnerable, open to pain. But without it, life loses meaning. Marina hugged her shoulders, and they walked on, two figures in a stream of equally wet, hurrying people. Parting at the subway, they hugged tighter than usual, wordlessly understanding this meeting was important for both. Marina needed to make sure Victoria was really climbing out, and Victoria needed to know their friendship had survived all trials and grown stronger. You'll be okay, Marina said in parting. You're the strongest person I know. Victoria smiled but said nothing. Strength is a strange concept. Sometimes the strongest actions require just one thing. Keep breathing when it seems there's no air left. On the way home she decided to stop at a bookstore and buy a new notebook for notes. The small shop on Lafayette was full of that special silence found only in places where books are kept. Victoria wandered between shelves, inhaling the scent of paper and printer's ink. And there, in the foreign literature section, she met his gaze. A man about her age, with warm brown eyes and barely noticeable gray at his temples, stood by the shelf with American novels. In his hands was a book, the very one she'd edited at her publishing house 6 months ago. He smiled, not insistently, not demandingly. Just the smile of a person who noticed a kindred soul. And Victoria smiled back. Not like before, with desperate thirst to be loved, with readiness to give all of herself without remainder for a ghostly promise of happiness. No, her smile was different, calm, conscious, the smile of a woman who had passed through fire and survived, who knew the value of each feeling and decision. Perhaps they would start talking, perhaps exchange opinions about the book, perhaps even go for coffee together, or maybe they would part forever, carrying with them only this fleeting exchange of smiles. But in that moment Victoria understood one simple truth. Life goes on. Through cracks in a broken mirror, new day sprouts. Sunlight, refracting in fragments, creates a rainbow. From ashes rises a phoenix, not the same one that burned, but carrying memory of the flame. She left the store with a new notebook and the business card of the man who turned out to be a literary critic. And also with this newfound wisdom that would now be her compass. A broken mirror can't be glued without traces, but you can learn to see beauty in the cracks themselves. The story of survival, strength, resilience, the story of a woman who lost herself and then found not the former, more fragile version, but a new one, tempered by pain but not broken by it. The rain stopped. Victoria raised her face to the sky where first stars peeked through cloud breaks. Distant but clear, pointing the way home. The mirror lay in pieces on the bathroom floor, each shard reflecting a fragment of morning light streaming through the window. Victoria knelt beside them, carefully collecting the sharp pieces in her palm. One cut her finger. A thin line of blood appeared, bright red against pale skin. Strange how such moments become metaphors. The broken mirror, the blood, the light dancing in fragments. A year ago she would have seen only destruction. Now she saw possibility. In the kitchen, she made coffee and sat by the window overlooking the small garden behind her building. Spring was coming to Seattle. She could see it in the swelling buds, in the way shadows fell differently, in the quality of air that seemed lighter somehow. Her phone buzzed. A text from her publisher. Victoria, the manuscript you recommended got picked up by a major house. The author wants to thank you personally. Coffee this afternoon. She smiled, remembering the story. A woman's journey from abuse to empowerment. Raw, honest, necessary. When she'd first read it 6 months ago, she'd cried. Not from sadness, but from recognition. Here was someone else who had walked through darkness and chosen to tell others it was possible to find light. That afternoon, sitting across from the young author, barely 25, with scars on her arms and hope in her eyes, Victoria felt something shift inside her. The last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. How did you know, the girl asked, that the story was worth telling? Victoria traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, thinking. Because survival stories aren't just about surviving, she said finally. They're about what you build from the wreckage. And yours shows others it's possible to build something beautiful. The girl nodded, tears in her eyes. Your recommendation letter, it said something about recognizing truth when you see it. That stayed with me. Walking home through the evening streets, Victoria thought about truth. How slippery it could be. How easy to ignore when it was inconvenient. She passed the bookstore where she'd bought her notebook the week before, where she'd smiled at the literary critic whose card still sat on her desk. She hadn't called him. Not from fear, she'd had enough of that, but from choice. There was something powerful in knowing she could reach out when she wanted to, not when loneliness drove her to it. At home, she opened her laptop and began typing. Not editing someone else's words this time, but finding her own. The story had been building inside her for months, pressing against her ribs like something wanting to be born. Chapter 1: The Mirror. She wrote about mirrors and masks, about love that wasn't love, about the difference between surviving and living. She wrote until her fingers cramped and her eyes burned, until the first draft of her truth sat blinking on the screen in Times New Roman. It wasn't literature. Might never be published. But it was hers. Every word earned through pain and growth and the gradual understanding that her story didn't end with betrayal. It began there. The next morning brought news she'd been expecting but dreading. Daniel's parole hearing had been scheduled. 15 years had become 8 with good behavior, and now he was asking for early release. The victim impact statement sat empty on her desk for 3 days before she filled it out. Not with anger, she'd moved beyond that, but with facts. What his actions had cost not just her, but the other women. What justice looked like when someone chose to rebuild rather than just survive. At the hearing, she sat in the front row and looked him in the eye as she read her statement. He was grayer now, smaller somehow. The charm that had once captivated her had curdled into something bitter and desperate. When he spoke, still manipulative, still trying to minimize his crimes, she felt nothing. Not hatred, not fear. Just a kind of distant sadness for the person he might have been if he'd chosen differently. The parole was denied. Walking out of the courthouse, Victoria didn't feel victorious. She felt finished. The chapter that had begun with love and ended with betrayal was finally closed. What came next was up to her. That evening she called the literary critic. Not because she needed saving or validation, but because she was curious about his thoughts on the book they'd both been reading. Because conversation with a stranger might be interesting. Because she was ready to see what friendship, or more, might look like when built on choice rather than need. They met for coffee. Talked about books and stories, about the difference between fiction and truth, about why some narratives survive and others fade. When he walked her home, she didn't invite him up. But she looked forward to seeing him again. Later, alone in her apartment, Victoria stood in front of her bathroom mirror, the one she'd replaced after the accident. Her reflection looked back, older now, marked by experience but not diminished by it. She thought about the young author, about her story finding its way into the world. About the literary critic and his kind eyes. About Marina and their unshakable friendship. About her parents, who'd learned to love her complexity rather than trying to protect her from it. About Daniel, who would spend years more in prison, and how that was justice but not her victory. Her victory was this: standing here, whole, choosing her next chapter from a place of strength rather than fear. The mirror showed her scars, the thin line on her wrist, the faint marks on her neck that had faded to silver threads. But it also showed her eyes, clear and unafraid. Her smile genuine and earned. She was ready for whatever came next. Ready to love again, carefully and completely. Ready to trust her instincts. Ready to write her own story instead of editing others. The broken mirror from that morning lay in her trash, each shard wrapped carefully in tissue paper so no one else would be cut. But the light it had fractured still danced in her memory. Broken things could still be beautiful. Survival could become art. Tomorrow she would continue her manuscript. Tonight, she would sleep without nightmares, dreaming instead of stories yet to be told. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It motivates us to keep working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to appear on your screen. We're very grateful to have you with us. See you soon.